Hello everyone, welcome to our today's video. Today we will be talking about planning the project work. Every project requires some level of planning. Of course, depending upon what type of project we are working on, whether we are going for a predictive approach or an adaptive approach, what kind of past experience we have, historical information is available. Based on many such factors, how you will be planning and to what degree the detailing will be done, that will be subjective. So there are various different aspects of project that needs to be planned, right from scope, time, cost, quality, risks, resources, procurements, stakeholders, and their communications. All these areas have to be properly planned. However, in our today's video, we will be focusing on scope. And within this also, we are going to discuss from a predictive point of view what happens or how scope should be planned in a predictive project. Fundamentally speaking, there are 4 steps that we have to carry out. First is to prepare a requirements management plan. And a scope management plan. Second is to collect requirements. After that, we can define our scope and then create our work breakdown structure. So in our today's video, before we get into all of these planning steps, let's first understand that how do you differentiate between requirements and scope. A lot of times I have observed that people don't really understand the difference, or they are using the two terms interchangeably, or maybe they have a wrong understanding or an incorrect understanding about the two terms here. So in order to differentiate between requirements and scope at any level, whether you're talking about requirements and scope at the project level or at the product level, doesn't matter. The difference is simply that requirements talk about what, and scope describes how. So to further explain, understand that requirements are, simply speaking, the characteristics, features, functionalities that the stakeholders are expecting in the final output. Basically, you go to your stakeholders and you ask them that what are their expectations, what is their wish list, or what do they want to see being developed as a set of features, functionalities, characteristics in the final output. Now, think of it in this way, that a stakeholder is not going to tell you how that particular functionality should be developed. What will stakeholder tell you? that this is what I want, this is what I expect, or this is what I I want to do as a final um, outcome or as a final thing. So requirements are generally given to you by the stakeholders. However, we being the experts, our team being the domain expert, we have to brainstorm and determine that how we can fulfill these requirements, what work, what method, technology, uh, processes we have to follow in order to deliver the requirements in the best possible manner. But I will take one simple layman's example to further clarify this. So, say for example, I have to go from point A to point B, two different cities maybe. Now, my requirement is to reach point B. That's my requirement. But how do I go from point A to point B? There are various options available. Like I can take a flight, I can book a train, or I can find a bus, or I might prefer traveling by my own car, or I might even take a taxi. All these different methods will help me to fulfill my requirement, which is to reach point B. However, each method comes at a different cost, takes different amount of time, gives me different level of comfort, comes with different type of risks associated with it, requires different type of resources, gives me different degree of flexibility. So when we are brainstorming in respect of how we have to fulfill the requirements, we also need to keep in mind these various other factors, that one method may be more costly but could be more or can give more or better quality, or can be less risky, whereas another method might be less costly but may take more time, may deliver slightly inferior quality, or comes with more risks, requires different type of skills that we may or may not have. So we have to keep in mind all these things. So we have to have a holistic understanding before we define scope. So as you can see, our step number 2 is to collect requirements, and step number 3 is to define scope. So once we have collected the requirements, then we can sit down to brainstorm on how we can fulfill these requirements. And one more thing, a lot of times you might have heard people saying that requirements or sorry scope sorry I think I pressed the wrong button. Yeah. So a lot of times you may have heard people saying that scope is like a boundary. Now, when you say boundary, what do you really mean by that? So if this is the boundary, then within this boundary, we have our requirements. So once the requirements are collected, then we determine the scope, which will of course be defined in such a way that it can fulfill all the agreed upon requirements, which are these pink dots. However, in any project, there will always be a possibility that at a later stage, someone comes up with a new requirement, which is the green dot. Now, excuse me. Now, if this is the green dot, which is a new requirement being asked, we can deliver it, of course, because this is something that is possible to do as it's within the boundary. However, we will need extra time, extra money, a change request will be needed basically. But if someone comes asking for a requirement which is this orange dot, then we will simply say no to it, because this is out of scope. This is beyond your agreed upon scope, and you won't be able to deliver this requirement. So this is something that we have to clearly agree upon at the very beginning of the project, or once we have got the requirements and we are at a stage of defining the scope, that what is in scope, and at the same time what is out of scope, which we will of course discuss in more detail once we talk about these individual planning steps in the upcoming videos. However, for the time being, my main point of discussion here is to understand the difference between requirements and scope. And when we say scope is a boundary, then this is literally what we mean by scope being a boundary, that within this boundary we can do whatever it is required, but outside this we cannot. In our upcoming videos, we will be going through these different steps of scope planning, the management plans, then collecting the requirements, defining the scope, and then creating the WBS. So stay tuned. Very shortly, we will be coming up with our next videos. Take care, bye, and hope we were able to clarify this particular concept for you in this short video.